There is a silent phenomenon unfolding all around you, yet almost no one is talking about it honestly. You see it in empty apartments where the lights stay off night after night. You see it in gyms filled with men wearing headphones, avoiding eye contact. You see it in workplaces where men speak less, smile less, and leave the moment their shift ends. And you see it most clearly in the digital world, where millions of men scroll endlessly, invisible, unheard, and slowly disappearing from real human connection. These men have not died. They have not moved away. They have not vanished physically. They have withdrawn psychologically, emotionally, and socially. They have stopped participating in the very system they were once expected to build, protect, and sustain. And the question no one wants to ask openly is not just why this is happening, but what pushed them there. For generations, a man's identity was built on purpose, responsibility, and recognition. He worked, he struggled, he sacrificed, and in return he received something deeply essential to his psychological survival. He received respect, not necessarily love, not necessarily admiration, but respect. Respect told him he mattered. Respect told him his effort had meaning. Respect told him he was seen. Without respect, the male mind begins to fracture. Because men are not biologically wired to exist as spectators in their own lives. They are wired to act, to build, to compete, and to contribute. When that contribution is dismissed, ignored, or treated as unnecessary, the mind does something unexpected. It begins to detach. What most people fail to understand is that male withdrawal is not dramatic, it is quiet. It does not announce itself with protests or emotional outbursts. It happens slowly, through micro-disappointments repeated thousands of times, a message ignored, a gesture unappreciated, an effort dismissed, a presence treated as optional rather than essential. Over time, the brain begins to calculate something new. It begins to question the cost of participation. It begins to ask whether the energy required to engage is worth the emotional risk of being dismissed. And when the answer becomes no, the man does not fight harder. He simply stops showing up. This is where the modern contradiction begins. Society still expects men to perform their traditional roles, to work harder, to earn more, to provide stability, to absorb stress without complaint. But at the same time, it has removed the emotional incentives that once made those sacrifices meaningful. Men are told they are not needed but still expected to deliver. They are told they are replaceable but still expected to commit fully. They are told their masculinity is problematic but still expected to embody strength. This contradiction creates a psychological trap, because the male brain cannot reconcile being both essential and irrelevant at the same time. And when faced with this paradox, it chooses the only logical escape: withdrawal. Many people misunderstand this withdrawal as weakness. They assume these men lack confidence, lack ambition, or lack courage. But in reality, withdrawal is often a calculated adaptation. It is the mind protecting itself from repeated psychological injury. The human brain, especially the male brain, is designed to conserve energy. It invests effort where effort produces results. When effort produces humiliation, rejection, or invisibility, the brain stops investing. This is not laziness. This is efficiency. It is survival. What makes this phenomenon even more disturbing is how invisible it remains, because these men are not causing chaos. They are not protesting in the streets. They are not demanding attention. They are simply disappearing quietly. They stop approaching. They stop initiating conversations. They stop expressing interest. They stop believing their presence makes any difference at all. And eventually, they stop seeing themselves as participants in the social world. They become observers instead. Technology has accelerated this process in ways few people fully grasp. Dating apps, social media, and algorithm-driven validation systems have transformed human relationships into marketplaces of perception. And like any marketplace, attention is not distributed evenly. A small percentage of men receive the majority of attention, while the vast majority receive almost none. This creates a psychological environment where millions of men experience repeated signals of low perceived value. not because they lack inherent worth, but because digital systems amplify comparison and concentrate visibility. Imagine experiencing rejection not once, not twice, but hundreds of times in subtle, silent ways. Imagine sending messages that receive no response. Imagine existing in environments where your presence does not register. Over time, the brain does not interpret this as random chance. It interprets it as evidence. Evidence that participation is futile. Evidence that effort will not be rewarded. Evidence that invisibility is permanent. And this is where the emotional shift becomes irreversible. Because once a man internalizes the belief that he is invisible, he stops attempting to be seen. He stops investing emotionally. He stops risking vulnerability. He stops engaging in the very behaviors required to form connection. Not because he cannot, but because he no longer believes it matters. At the same time, modern cultural narratives have subtly reframed male disposability as normal. Men are often portrayed as optional, replaceable, or inherently flawed. Their struggles are minimized. Their emotional pain is dismissed. Their loneliness is treated as either their fault or their responsibility alone to solve. This creates an environment where male suffering becomes psychologically illegible. It exists, but it is not acknowledged. And something dangerous happens when suffering is not acknowledged. It does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes detachment. It becomes apathy. It becomes emotional numbness. A man who feels unseen eventually stops needing to be seen. A man who feels unvalued eventually stops valuing connection itself. This is the stage where disappearance becomes complete, not physical disappearance, psychological disappearance. The man still goes to work. He still pays bills. He still exists. But internally, he has exited the social contract. He no longer believes participation will produce meaning. He no longer believes connection will produce fulfillment. He no longer believes effort will produce recognition. Many women do not realize the subtle ways their behavioral adaptations have contributed to this shift. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but systemically. When hyperselectivity becomes normalized, when validation becomes effortless and abundant, and when attention becomes infinite, the psychological dynamics of attraction change. Scarcity disappears, and when scarcity disappears, perceived value shifts. The male brain evolved in environments where effort correlated with reward, where persistence increased the probability of success. But in modern environments, effort often has no correlation with outcome. This breaks the motivational feedback loop that once sustained male engagement, because the male nervous system depends on perceived progress. Without progress, motivation collapses. What makes this situation even more complex is that most men never articulate this process consciously. They do not sit down and decide to disappear. They simply stop feeling compelled to engage. They feel less excitement, less motivation, less urgency, and eventually less hope. Hope is the most fragile component of male psychology, not hope in fantasy, but hope in possibility, the belief that effort can change outcomes, the belief that presence can create impact, the belief that persistence can produce connection. When hope disappears, participation becomes irrational. And this is the silent crisis unfolding now. Millions of men are not angry, they are not protesting, they are not rebelling, they are disengaging, quietly, permanently. They are redirecting their energy towards solitary pursuits, work, fitness, gaming, private hobbies, controlled environments where effort produces predictable outcomes, environments where their actions still matter. Because at its core, this phenomenon is not about rejection. It is about psychological starvation, the starvation of recognition, the starvation of appreciation, the starvation of significance. Human beings can survive without many things, but they cannot survive psychologically without significance, without the feeling that their existence influences the world around them. And when a man stops believing he matters, he does not collapse, he disappears. He becomes quieter, more distant, more self-contained. He stops reaching. He stops risking. He stops hopping. And eventually, he stops being seen at all. Not because he was never there, but because the world stopped noticing. And once a man learns to live without being noticed, he rarely returns to the version of himself that needed to be seen.